welcome to The Conversation. My name is Shannon Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Blacks and Jews in Conversation. And today we have two special guests, Peter Muller and Oded Willkens. And we are here with Equal Justice Alliance. What else would you expect from a show like this but equal justice and an alliance? A conversation for equal justice. What, might you ask, is the subject? Well, there is a terrorism bill. We've talked about terrorism for over a year and a half on this program. And the bill, the legislation that was passed, sponsored by Dianne Feinstein, of all people, from California, because I imagine she gets funding from these labs, tries to equate terrorism against labs that experiment cruelly, unjustly on animals with the terrorism that is being visited upon us by the terrorists, wild-eyed, bushy-tailed from around the world, as one and the same. Now, the logic escapes me. I hope it escapes you. But I do not understand how people who can step this way or that way, intentionally otherwise, in pursuit of our furry friends, in pursuit of the creatures that inhabit the planet with us, in hopes of seeing a more just life for them, that the people striving for their well-being are considered the same terrorists as the ones just jailed for life in England for planning to blow up their fellow countrymen or planning to blow us up. So for the logic or illogic in all of this, we're going to turn to these experts. I don't give you these opinions. I don't venture an opinion on anything. I venture to our experts, Peter Muller and Oded Willkens. And first we'll hear from Peter. Peter and I have a common friend, Ahmed Halima. Ahmed was a guest on this program in its very first month. And we had a discussion about the Middle East. So we'll be going there on our Juris mission, sponsored by the American-Israel Friendship League, in a couple of weeks during the month of May. And in tribute to Ahmed, he's had his medical setbacks and is making a recovery of sorts. We are continuing our mission of education, our mission of mutual understanding between judges and between countries. Peter, as a mutual friend between all of us, is continuing Ahmed Halima's quest for the rights of animals, and as are all our district attorneys, enforcing the cruelty against animal preventative laws and seeking to redress a system that was meant to put equality in motion in our society, so that humans, animals, all of us can respect the right to life, Sava l'chaim, as said in Hebrew, because once you respect the spilling of blood as a crime in the animal world, you will respect it in the human world. And now, Peter, I'm turning over to you for your expertise.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you so much for inviting us. Yes, indeed, there was this bill that was passed in Congress called the Animal Enterprise Terrorist Act. Normally, since we have limited time, we just call it by its short name, which is IETA. So we'll be referring to IETA, but its full name is the Animal Enterprise Terrorist Act. It's a very pernicious act. It has many flaws, both from the legal point of view and from the activist point of view. It's totally unacceptable to the American tradition and American culture. It's one of the most pernicious acts we've ever seen passed. Oded is an attorney. She's very well versed with the legal aspects of it, and Oded will be giving us the legal aspects of it first, and then I'll talk a little more about the activist point of view.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Oded Willkens, and I'm Executive Director of the Equal Justice Alliance. And as Peter said, a law was passed last year called the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, not the Terrorist Act, but the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, that seriously affects the legitimate free speech rights of American citizens. So what does the law say? There are 3 criteria to be prosecuted under the law. One is using interstate commerce, so that means traveling between across state lines, or using email or telephone across state lines. The second element is intending to interfere or damage an animal enterprise. And the third element is causing economic damage or profit loss or bodily injury or fear of bodily injury. But what's remarkable about this law is that it also prosecutes anyone who causes no harm and no damage. So it prosecutes anyone who uses interstate commerce first, secondly, intends to interfere with an animal enterprise. And that is sufficient to be prosecuted under this law. What's also remarkable about this law is that it is a predicate for wiretapping. So this provides the government the authority to wiretap if it thinks that you are conspiring to interfere with an animal enterprise. The other part of this law is that it provides stepped-up penalties for prison sentences just for corporate profit loss alone. So there are stepped-up penalties from 1 to 20 years. And if the profit loss that you've caused by interfering with an animal enterprise is less than $10,000, the prison term is 1 year. And if it's more than $10,000, it can go up to 20 years. Is that terrorism? It doesn't sound like terrorism to me. I mean, what is terrorism? When you think of terrorism, you think of suicide bombers, you think of people flying planes into buildings, and even under U.S. law, domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts that are dangerous to human life or that appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or affect the conduct of government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. And now I ask you, what does that have to do with corporate profit loss? So even if there's a corporate profit loss of even $1, under this law, technically, you could be prosecuted under an anti-terrorism law, and you could obviously be branded a terrorist. Now, it was enacted, this law was enacted, it appears to have been enacted, to dampen the free speech rights of American citizens advocating for animals. But, you know, the law actually goes much farther than that because it seriously encroaches on the free speech rights of American citizens advocating not only for animals, but also for better labor conditions and for civil rights. And actually, Martin Luther King and his followers would likely have been prosecuted as terrorists under this law simply because they engaged in national lunch counter sit-ins that caused a lot of profit loss. So you can see just how mischievous this law is. And there are several concerns about this law. But first I'd like to turn this over back to Peter, who will talk a little bit about how it actually was passed.
Okay, the way it was passed was really outrageous. It makes you think you're no longer living in the United States. As we know, we have a Congress that makes the laws. There are 535 members of Congress. Out of the 535 members, of course, there are 100 senators and 435 representatives. Out of that 535, one and only one Congress member voted against this law. That was Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. The other 534 members either voted for it or they simply acquiesced to it by remaining silent. It was passed in the Senate, first of all, by being put on the special calendar. Once a bill comes out of committee, it goes on to one of the two calendars. One is sort of a fast-track calendar called a suspension calendar. And it really only is meant to serve bills that are not controversial. And the way it works is if nobody objects to it, it stays on the fast-track calendar and simply passes if nobody objects to it. Any one senator could object to it. Out of the 100 senators, not a single one raised their voice and said, I object to this bill. It's not controversial. It doesn't belong on a suspension calendar. Not a single one of our 100 senators made that point. You're saying, well, but don't we have a whole bunch of progressive Democrats in the Senate? Where were they? Well, they were sponsors in part. Dianne Feinstein of California was one of the sponsors of this. So we were totally sold out by our friends, the Democratic progressives. In the House of Representatives, when that came up in the House of Representatives, came up on November 13th, I believe, the Monday after the elections. Oded and I were both in Washington, D.C. lobbying with about 10 other people. We were going through the entire office buildings, making a stop at every congressman's office, every representative's office, trying to make sure they get to the floor and vote on this. The vote was scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. We had a lot of people saying, yes, we'll be down there, we'll be voting against it. As we were walking around the floor, we had just finished all the Democrats. We were now going to start on the Republican representatives. I get a call on my cell phone, and the news is the bill is on the floor of the House of Representatives right this second. I ran across to the Capitol building. After going through 4 levels of security, it had already passed by the time I got to the gallery. And again, the only person that voted against it was Dennis Kucinich, who made it to the floor in time and voted against it. There were a total of about 6 people there, including Dennis. 5 people voted for it. Dennis voted against it, and it became a law by the vote of 5 people. Totally outrageous, totally un-American, and totally unconstitutional in my view.
Let me interject here at this point. What about Hillary Clinton? What about Al Gore? These are supposed to be the animal rights activists on the East Coast. And where were they? And what about Kucinich? I mean, he's no fool. If he wants to stop something, he has allies, and he says, you're going to join with me, and we're going to stop. One senator, that's easy. If one senator wants to stop something, they stop it. And how many things have they stopped? Look at the Iraq War. How many people joined on Bush? We're going to have this date and that date. You're not going to get funding. You're not going to go here. You're not going to go there. And we're all going to... And what about the Speaker of the House? Goes to Syria, goes to Iran. She doesn't care whether it's foreign policy reserved to the executive or not. They know what they want to do, and they know how they're going to do it, and they don't care about anything provided in the Constitution or otherwise. This is the agenda. What happened here? Obviously, Kucinich has his own agenda, and if he wanted to get allies, he could have made a greater impact. What happened with Gore and his global warming? The entire, as you said, the entire animal welfare community was sold out. Now tell me about... That's not my conclusion, it's yours. I'm looking for the logic behind the modus operandi here. Tell me what happened with the other bills that were passed in exchange for silence on this.
Okay. Okay, let me just say a few words on this, and I'll invite Oded to also chirp in. What happened, okay, there's 2 different places. Well, first of all, in the Senate. Okay, here's what happened in the Senate. The bill came to the suspension calendar just before election.
It didn't go to it's not the suspension, that was the House.
Oh, it's a fast-track calendar. What is it called?
And the Senate, it was passed by the Senate by unanimous consent, which means that you needed to simply have one senator object to the law. Unfortunately, at the time, and this was really, it seems to have been orchestrated beautifully, probably by the Republicans, to pass the law just before elections, because think of the public relations fiasco if you would have been the senator that blocked an anti-terrorism bill just before Congress was going to recess for elections. And that's exactly when this law was passed by the Senate. It was passed just before the Senate went on recess for the elections. So but it was placed on the suspension calendar in the House of Representatives by Senator Sensenbrenner, I believe.
Sensenbrenner from Minnesota.
And I'm sorry, go ahead. So I'll
okay. Well, yeah. Again, it was in the Senate. It was obviously orchestrated to invite anybody who objected to it. They would have been torn apart by the local media, like Senator whatever is soft on terrorism. That would have done him or her in the election. So that was the first thing. The second one is it was scheduled for 6:30 on the evening of the day in which Congress reconvened. Now, since the Democrats had just taken the House, they were all over the place trying to figure out who was going to head what committee. They had a lot of internal things to do, and they had set aside, I'm sure many of the people had set aside time to make sure they'll be there at 6 or 6:30 when that bill was scheduled to pass. But while they were doing their organizational fiascos in the afternoon, Sensenbrenner snuck it onto the calendar at 3 o'clock. He moved it up at 3 o'clock. There was about a few seconds notice, and Dennis Kucinich was the only one who evidently noticed the time coming across on his ticker. He ran down to the floor and made his stand. Nobody else was able to react fast enough before the bill passed.
And we do know that there was at least, I know there was at least one other representative who was looking forward to opposing the bill on the floor and was actually working on her speech when her staff found out that the bill had already passed.
Yes.
And is that
Nonsense, please. I'm naive, and I'm not the smartest kid on the block, and I don't make it a weekly pursuit of Congress, and this is not a political show, we're not a political organization, and I'm not a political person. But you are never going to convince our worldly wise audience that only Dennis Kucinich had the intelligence to look at a ticker and know when a bill was all of a sudden coming due, and all these mavens on global warming and all these geniuses on animal rights all of a sudden were taken by complete surprise and couldn't get in their acts in gear. Please, I am not a wax dummy here. Let's bypass this for now. Let's go on. And I know party hypocrisy when I see one. That's why I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican, and why I neither favor this nor that, and why everybody is all the same, whatever the color. That's why we have this organization. Everybody is exactly the same, for good or for bad. Now, what happened to the other bills that did pass? There were two wonderful bills that did pass, but did they pass at the expense of passing this one?
Well, I really can't talk about the various environmental bills and other bills that were passed in exchange for this, because I wasn't in the back rooms where all the deals are made in Congress. So I'm really not that knowledgeable about what the inner workings are in Congress. Although I'd like to be a little bit more knowledgeable about it. But what I would like to do is I'd like to go...
Well, what about Peter? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Go.
But the thing is...
go ahead, Peter, if you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and yes, it is true. However, we have to work with a lot of animal rights organizations.
And you have to work with me right now, so go ahead.
I'm not going to... I have to withhold some information because we still have to work with some of the people.
All right, because I like you and we like Ahmed and so on. All right, I'll admit defeat here. Go ahead and do what you do.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Sorry.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to actually talk a little bit about the law and its pitfalls, because you really don't know whether what you're doing is legal or illegal, because the law there are many aspects of this law that are not defined. So if it says you're not allowed to interfere with an animal enterprise, well, what does that mean? What does interfere mean? It's not a defined term. So interfere could mean sending an email, doing a telephone call across state lines and saying, well, why don't you come over to my neck of the woods, and we'd like to increase people's awareness about buying cage-free eggs, let's say. And that seems to be a bit innocuous. But if it causes profit loss on the part of a supermarket, then they could use this as a means of prosecuting those people, unfortunately. And what is an animal enterprise? It includes virtually every single U.S. retail business in the United States, because they sell animals or animal products. So let's say you want to picket a big box store because they are selling materials that are made by child labor in Indonesia. And you cause profit loss for them. Well, that can come under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. If you are picketing a business because of bad labor conditions, well, if they sell any animals or animal products, then that also comes under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. So let's say, you're picketing a big box store. They're an animal enterprise if they sell leather wallets, leather boots, leather purses, or any kind of fur coats. That is an animal enterprise. If you picket a supermarket, that's an animal enterprise because they sell animal products, chicken wings and beef and that kind of thing. And let's say you want to do an undercover investigation because one of the businesses you feel is violating the animal welfare laws, or they're violating child labor laws, or they're violating civil rights laws. There's nothing under the Act that actually gives you an affirmative defense against prosecution. So if you try to do an undercover investigation of, let's say, an agricultural business because the runoff is causing environmental degradation, you could really be prosecuted under this law if you, let's say, publicize the undercover investigation and that agricultural business then loses business. And there is nothing under this law that protects you in case you say that this really is supposed to protect the public because it's a public health hazard, or there's an environmental damage that's caused by the business.
Let me bring out here that you are an attorney.
Yes.
And that there is a conference coming up in the New York City Bar Association, the Animal Rights Division, of which I'm a member. You don't have to be attorneys to be a member of the Animal Rights Division. You can come as a member of the general public. You can come as a member of broadcasters, which I have done in the past as a broadcaster, and I've made suggestions there in the past as a broadcaster. And you, however, with the expertise of an attorney, people can gain this added veneer. So when you tell them all these things, you're referring to the legislation, you're referring to the actual laws and so on, and those who wish to learn how to join this fight, because it is a fight to restore what once was. How do they contact you? It's equaljusticealliance.com.
Yes, equaljusticealliance.com. And if you feel that you've been arrested, or you're being hassled, or you feel that you're not going to be leafleting or protesting or otherwise exercising your First Amendment rights, we would like to know about it. So please do contact us at www.equaljusticealliance.com.
And that is also a not-for-profit.
And that is a not-for-profit corporation.
And what is the date of this animal rights conference at the New York City Bar Association, which is 44th Street, I believe, between 5th and 6th?
Yes, it's the New York City Bar Association, the Issues Pertaining to Animals Committee and the Civil Rights Committee are co-sponsoring a panel on this law. I will be moderating it, and we're going to have a fabulous panel. We're going to have 8 speakers. We're going to have Minna Elias, who is the Chief of Staff for Carolyn Maloney, who opposed the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. We will also have Will Potter, who is an award-winning journalist and who also has a blog that is called greenisthenewred.org, or .com. Or is it .org or .com?
I think it's .org.
.org. And we're also going to have Heidi Bogosian of the National Lawyers Guild. We are also going to have Louis Sirkin, who is one of the foremost First Amendment lawyers in the country, and many, many others. It is open to the public. It starts at 6 o'clock. It's from 6 to 9, and it's on May 22nd, which is a Tuesday, on May 22nd, and we invite everyone to come. It is free to the public, and what you will learn there will really knock your socks off, because there you will hear stories about how the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act is actually being applied on the ground.
Peter, you are on the panel too, I understand.
Yes, I'm one of the 8 illustrious people that Oded just mentioned.
And what is the subject of your particular expertise there?
Okay, my explanation will involve explaining exactly from an activist point of view. Most of the people, except Will Potter and myself, are attorneys or judges. I'm the only, and Will Potter, we're the only non-attorneys on the panel, and my point of view will be the point of view of the activist. And it's one of the ways to look at this law is, what does it do to activists? How do activists react? And social justice activists in general, whether they are animal rights activists or or labor activists or any kind of other social justice activists have a certain tools of their trade. We have a certain bag of tricks that we bring with us. And one very commonly used and very respected in this culture bag of tools that we use is what we call civil disobedience. Rosa Parks typically used civil disobedience to make a point. Many other social justice activists use civil disobedience. I've used civil disobedience. I mean, you're saying, okay, fine, there's a minor infraction of some local ordinance that you're trying to get me to stop my protest, and I'm not going to do that. You're going to jail me? Fine, go ahead. And now under IATA, the penalties are a lot more severe. The normal penalty for something like, usually if a policeman says you can't demonstrate here, you have to go around the corner behind the gas station and demonstrate there, and you say, well, look, officer, that doesn't make sense. I have no problem with the guy at the gas station. I have a problem with the occupant of this building. And he says, no, you have to go because I tell you to, and you say no. Then normally you'll get charged with something like disorderly conduct, not following a lawful order of a police officer, conspiracy to litter, some kind of nonsense misdemeanor they throw at you. And normally when you go to court and you explain to the judge what happened, the prosecutor, you don't even get to the judge, the prosecutor knows it's a nonsense charge, and normally you get something like an ACD, which is an adjournment with contemplation of dismissal, means go home, don't do it again for 30 days. Okay, now under IATA, instead of looking at ACD, you're looking at 10 years or 20 years. And that's different, it's draconian, doesn't make sense, it's totally un-American. It's more like the old Soviet regime. It's not what we're used to in this country.
We have 1 minute left. I want to thank you both so very much for your work on this behalf, because the slope is so slippery that from the animals comes us. You know, they've labeled this as nefarious terrorism. Who knows what next will be labeled? And if people think that they're getting away with this, who knows what is next on the agenda. Besides, this is bad enough, and this has to be corrected. There were reasons why this legislation didn't exist before. It was perhaps inappropriate, and it has to be addressed before it goes further. And it's a very, very small lobby. Most experimentation has already been proved to be unnecessary and unproductive and cruel. And one last word. Peter, your wife agrees with you on all this, yes?
Yes, she does. She agrees with me totally. She's totally supportive of my coming to New York to be on your show.
Thank you so very much, both of you.